Following days of severe tensions that started with the statement of Abu Ubaidah, the spokesperson of Al-Qassam Brigades, the armed wing of Hamas, when he said that he will be postponing the release of Israeli prisoners of war, and then followed by Donald Trump's statements that he wants to ethnically cleanse Gaza, applying pressure on Egypt, Jordan, and other countries too. It seems like now we've reached a stage of de-escalation, with more reports about positive talks, understandings, and several moves on the ground that indicate that we will be continuing with this phase of the ceasefire without too many problems. But before I get into that, we've been talking about the Egyptian actions in the Sinai Peninsula ever since October the 7th. Egypt has been conducting drills, unprecedented numbers of troops in Sinai, the biggest military drills possible, special forces in Rafah, including the top figures in the Egyptian army on the Rafah borders. One of these moves was something that they revealed in one of their recent drills near Rafah, during which they showed a group of paragliders in the Egyptian army. Who uses paragliders in which army? This is something that is very uncommon. Armies usually don't use individuals on paragliders. They're very dangerous and they make the person very vulnerable, and they're not that practical. However, Egypt intended to send another message to Israel, and this time a very severe message. We are able to conduct something larger than a 7th of October operation. It reminded them of the operation that started all of this, Al-Aqsa flood on the 7th of October, when the paragliders of Al-Qassam Brigades entered the Palestinian occupied territories to begin the operation of Al-Aqsa flood. Egypt is constantly sending messages to Israel, and this was one of the most severe messages that they're sending Israel, with the escalation talks, with the threats coming from Israel, the inquiries about Egyptian presence in Sinai, alongside the pressure coming from Donald Trump. Now, with Donald Trump and his pressure, one of the things that he stated in his meeting with King Abdullah of Jordan is it doesn't look like we're actually going to have any sanctions or financial problems against Egypt and Jordan. The man literally did a 180 within a few days after indicating that he's going to take some action when it comes to Egypt and Jordan. The moves of Donald Trump and the fact that he does these U-turns indicate clearly that the man only threatens, and being a loudmouth, trying to scare people off. And now we have proof on the ground that things are moving forward. What happened? We've had multiple declarations coming from Israel, and you might hear something in the Israeli media, and the problem is you'll hear the opposite from Benjamin Netanyahu. And that's something not new, because Benjamin Netanyahu, whenever there's any sort of diplomatic progress, he tries to hide it, deny it, and have certain actions on the ground so that he doesn't show that there's any significant, diplomatic progress or any Israeli concessions to Hamas and the Palestinian side, although he couldn't cover anything today, but only deny from his office. So what happened exactly? Firstly, there was a report in the Israeli media that, hold on a second, things are going to go ahead. Channel 12, based on officials, said mediators showed willingness, everyone showed willingness to continue with the ceasefire, and Israel is showing willingness to abide by the humanitarian clauses. What else happened? The Israeli army broadcasting. Today they said an agreement on allowing caravans, modular homes, and heavy engineering equipment, which we were talking about yesterday, it has been agreed upon that they will be entering Gaza immediately going into the Gaza Strip. Shortly after that, everything was visible. Yesterday we started to see the tents going into the northern part of Gaza with unprecedented numbers of trucks. Today, over 800 trucks in one day of aid, of tents, modular homes going in, caravans going in, heavy engineering equipment, tractors, excavators, all of that going into the Gaza Strip indicating that the work that has been happening with the mediators is proving to be fruitful. It's succeeding on the ground. And Axios, they also had a report quoting an Israeli official saying that we conveyed a message to Hamas that we're committed to implementing the agreement if the movement adheres to it. So we're seeing statements, we're seeing confirmations from politicians, from the Israeli army, but there's outright denial from Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu's office denied, actually. Netanyahu denied, no, there has been no progress, no breakthrough whatsoever, and I ordered Israel Katz, the defense minister, to have a plan, and he indeed had a plan, this proposal, to go back to the war in case Hamas does not adhere to the agreement. And he's denying that there's any breakthrough, but the things are happening on the ground. Why are you denying? He's denying because he doesn't want to make himself appear to be a defeated man who is submitting to the demands of the Palestinian people and to Hamas. And he also doesn't want problems with Smotrich and co, who have been celebrating and hailing the grotesque ethnic cleansing statements by Donald Trump and his preposterous propositions against the Palestinian people. They were on a high. He doesn't want to ruin that party. However, on the ground, everything is happening. It's not only that, they're having other breaches to cover up the fact that there is progress. What did they do? They had an attack in Khan Yunis. They just targeted a home. There haven't been casualties reported so far, but they just hit a home, alongside, of course, other breaches that they had. He's doing that to cover up what's happening on the ground. What's happening on the ground indicates and proves that Israel indeed submitted to the demands of the Palestinians, and they are starting to allow everything back into Gaza whilst compensating for the shortage of the previous period, as requested by the spokesperson of Al-Qassam Brigades, Abu Ubaidah. And it wasn't only that, we had a confirmation from Hamas. Hamas came out and said, no, we are agreeing to continue to implement the ceasefire agreement, including the prisoner exchange. They said that the mediator talks were very positive, the gaps were closed. These discussions, of course, came after successive Israeli violations, but the meetings that we had were very positive. There have been understandings on the implementation of the agreement in all its aspects. Who started to abide by the agreement now? It's Israel. Hamas were abiding by the agreement. Hamas were abiding by the agreement to the T. It's Israel who had 470 breaches and thought they can get away with their continued breaches now. So Hamas is even saying that there's progress, and we're clearly going to see a names list tomorrow being published. That's going to be sent from the senior people in Qatar to Dadi Barniha. Al-Thani is going to send it to the head of the Mossad, the list of the names of the Israelis who are going to be released on Saturday. All of that indicates that there has been progress. Now, going back to Benjamin Netanyahu is denying. He's saying that no, there's no breakthrough, nothing is happening. Katz is also saying the same thing. No, we're prepared for war and Hamas need to adhere. And what Hamas only said is, by the way, we need to get into phase 2. Immediately. So Hamas is not only pushing for the implementation of this, said urgently, talks about phase 2 will need to continue. Benjamin Netanyahu is hiding all of that because of the intensity of the Israeli defeat, this humiliation. And that's something very problematic for people like Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, narcissistic psychopaths, self-centered, egoistic, only concerned about themselves and their image, them being dictated by the conditions and by the demands of a group of people fighting them inside of Gaza. And that's not only coming from the confirmations that we had from Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu is facing intense criticism inside of Israel, with senior figures in Israel criticizing him heavily. So we had two very interesting articles. One of them was published in Ma'arif and one of them was published in Walla in Israel. The first one was published by the previous head of the Shabak, Yoram Cohen. What did Yoram Cohen say? Yoram Cohen said Netanyahu is doing things that even dictators wouldn't do. Netanyahu is a crazy prime minister. He's harming and risking the national security of the state of Israel. And he also mentioned the fact that during his period, Benjamin Netanyahu tried to ask him to do things that were not legit, they were not legal. And he stated his refusal, showing concern again about potentially taking out the current serving head of the Shabak, and the criticism of the resignation of the previous chief of staff of the Israeli army, Herzi Halevi, saying we all remember how much pressure and how much humiliation he faced, that man. And he said things about Benjamin Netanyahu like anyone he doesn't like, he will do everything to remove him from power. If he could remove everyone, the legal advisor would have long since removed them from office, even the Supreme Court staff. And he also mentioned certain things when it comes to the corruption and the previous corruption charges against Benjamin Netanyahu. And that's someone who worked with Benjamin Netanyahu side by side. He served under Benjamin Netanyahu, and that's in the Israeli mainstream media. Clear criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu. Then there was a more severe criticism coming from a senior figure who was in the Israeli army, Major General Giora Island. Giora Island made unprecedented statements in one of the interviews he had recently, saying that Hamas can dictate to us. Hamas can dictate what we do, in a massive criticism to Israel and its genocide inside of Gaza. He said the picture is that Israel failed miserably in Gaza. We must start from this point. Otherwise, we create expectations for things that are not realistic. The defeat in the war in Gaza, according to two criteria that are not political and not populist but professional. One way is to check who achieved their goals and who did not. The second, even more objective way, is which side succeeded in imposing its will on the other side. This is coming from Israel, ladies and gentlemen. This is not just some analysis. These are people who were top figures in the Israeli army. He said, look at the hostage agreement. Israel opened the Rafah crossing, withdrew from the Netzarim line. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians went back to the north. It allows not only food and water to Gaza, but also brings heavy equipment that is the beginning of reconstruction. Hamas can dictate to us in phase 2 an agreement in which, at best, we will receive the rest of the hostages. And that is important, but we will also pay with the mass release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. Israel will have to agree to end the war and a withdrawal from the perimeter, or the buffer zone that Israel is currently still occupying, which is approximately 700 meters in its majority parts inside of the Gazan territories. And it didn't end there. He said, if Israel believes that only military pressure will bring results, no military pressure will bring these results. If you occupy the strip and the civilians remain, Hamas will remain too. Apart from receiving terrible attacks against the occupying force, you will not gain anything. This is what Benjamin Netanyahu was trying to cover when he said that there is no progress, that, nothing is happening, there is no breakthrough, and we're still waiting for Hamas to adhere to the agreement. He's trying to cover up the things that happened on the ground, trying to cover up that Hamas played him around with their moves, waiting for Israel to withdraw fully from the Netzarim corridor. Up until they made this demand for Israel to comply. They could have done that before, but they chose to do it now, putting Israel in a much more serious and difficult position, especially with the mass protests that are happening in Israel to release all of the Israeli prisoners of war. And again, all that Hamas is asking is for Israel to comply. However, the threats are still there. Although there have been constant talks from Donald Trump, we're seeing things being loosened or revealed for what they are, empty threats. There are still moves happening on the ground and preparations happening on the ground in preparation that things might break up if the things on the ground don't go as planned. We don't have, for example, a smooth entry of everything that Israel agreed upon, although things are visibly going inside of Gaza now. And Hamas then says Israel is breaching again and we're not going to release the Israeli prisoners of war on Saturday. One of these preparations, and we've been talking about the preparations of Ansarullah for a couple of days, but again, it's from Ansarullah with more statements coming from Al-Houthi. Al-Houthi, Abdul Malik Al-Houthi, the leader of Ansarullah in Yemen, is saying, we are ready to attack completely. We're fully ready to attack, and we're monitoring what's happening on Saturday. I called the armed forces to be on highest preparedness in case the Trump plan goes ahead. And he didn't stop there. He also said, expel Israelis. You're talking about expelling the Palestinians from the land. Expel the Israelis to the United States. You love them so much. Take them. The Palestinians are the natives of the land. And this is coming following multiple calls, by the way, from global leaders to expel the Israelis rather than the Palestinians. The fact that this statement is being mentioned by so many leaders is a massive sign of the global shift and the self-damage that Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu do to their own interests that they claim they're pushing for. They're having more and more leaders, Turkey, Yemen, Iran, Saudi Arabia even, considered to be an ally and a country that Benjamin Netanyahu wants to have peace treaty with. It even led someone like Bezalel Smotrich to have this statement recently that the Palestinian population in Gaza, they're actually not the population in Gaza. They are refugees from Haifa and from Ramli and from other places too, in what is now called Israel, which is occupied Palestine. And he's saying these statements without realizing how he's directly condemning himself. That is indeed accurate. 72% of the population of Gaza are refugees. Refugees from where? Refugees from occupied Palestine. Sdoud, Asqalan, some of them from Haifa, some of them from Yaf, some of them from other parts of occupied Palestine too, other parts from areas close to Jerusalem as well. And that's why they stick to their land so much, because for over 50 years, Israel did not allow them to go back to the areas that they were expelled from, some of them for over 70 years, from the Nakba of 1948, whilst others faced expulsion in 1967. So he's condemning himself, and he's again proving to the whole world that the population of Gaza, they're indeed refugees, and we are the ones who expelled them. And he's expecting something, is expecting different results from the world following these statements. All of these things are very important. And again, despite all of the progress that's happening on the ground, when it comes to the ceasefire, when it comes to getting the aid that Israel agreed to get into Gaza in phase 1, and with the preparations of phase 2, because phase 2 considers very substantial things such as the declarations of ending the war, Israel withdrawing from the remaining areas, and we also are talking about the prisoners of Hezbollah. The Hezbollah prisoners are included in phase 2 of this ceasefire. Hezbollah are not negotiating with Israel regarding this. The negotiations are being led by Hamas, because Israel imprisoned some of the Hezbollah fighters during the escalation in Lebanon. All of that is happening, but there are still preparations when it comes to the Arab Summit, when it comes to preparations from other countries too, in relation to the plan of Donald Trump, in case, again, they have any delusions that things might go ahead with this plan. And the final thing that I wanted to talk to you about is Lebanon. In Lebanon, the Israeli presence, the Israeli occupation inside of Lebanon, they had an extension of the previous temporary ceasefire that lasted 60 days for up until the 18th of February, which is 5 days from now, to withdraw from the remaining parts of Lebanon. Now, so far, with the return of many Lebanese to their villages in the south, Israel withdrew from approximately 12 of these villages. However, they asked from Donald Trump to remain in 5 key strategic areas without defining a time limit. This is being published now in Lebanon, and people are also protesting about some of the moves the country is taking in relation to Iranian planes going into Beirut, with certain problems happening and issues of people going back to Lebanon, criticizing the Lebanese government. But the main thing is this request to continue. Some reports are publishing that, Lebanon actually agreed that Israel can remain in 5 key strategic areas in the southern part of Lebanon. However, the Lebanese side, or the main person in charge of the negotiations, who has been mediating with the American administration, and he's representing Hezbollah, who's Nabih Berri, he said that no, we did not agree on that. But the thing is, they did not provide a clear answer as to how they will be responding. The only thing he said is that they will be considered an occupation, and the state has responsibility. Is this a move intended to give Israel a little bit more time inside of Lebanon up until they withdraw? Or will we see more scenes of people returning and clashes potentially turning violent after the deadline finishes on the 18th of February? It's looking likely, based on certain moves that happened inside of Israel as well, that things are headed towards de-escalation in Lebanon, especially with the declaration of the Israeli army that the population can go back to the north from the 1st of March. This could be an attempt from Israel to try their luck for the last time to have certain key positions in Lebanon, or they could be serious about it, which could potentially lead to another escalation in Lebanon.